Hello, and welcome back to Most Riser Fans. My name is Terry Bartley, and I'm your host, and this is another minisode where I'm just going to be sort of chatting with you guys. This is, like I said in one of my previous episodes, this is kind of taking the place of what intros used to be. My intros were a little more personal, where I would just sort of vent or whatever. So this is sort of taking the place of those. So if you're sort of unsure what this isn't an Ink Over AI episode. This is a different thing. This is a minisode for Most Riser Fans. And we'll get maybe one of these a month. They're not going to be super common, but they will happen from time to time. So this one, I didn't really know what to do for this one. That's part of why we didn't have an Ink Over AI episode this week, because I really felt weird talking about the things I always talk about. And I don't think I have to be subtle about why. There were awful things happening in the country I live in, the United States, specifically in Minnesota. 2 innocent people within the course of less than a month had been killed by Border Patrol officials, and it's pretty horrific, and it leads to me to have a lot of questions about kind of everything. What is right to do at this moment? What can we do? It was really hard. I didn't really want to do an episode about, I have a ton of episodes planned. And the next ones I wanted to do was this series about the TV show Girls and how it sort of is a harbinger for content. And we'll get into it later. We will eventually get into it. But it just felt weird to do something sort of pop culture and kind of throwaway in light of what was going on. So part of me was really tempted to just sort of not do one. Or if I did, do something that was sort of very specifically about that. And I also didn't really want to do that because I felt this sort of creative paralysis that I was feeling is not unusual in the wake of this kind of tragedy. Because, I'm not an incredibly serious author most of the time. I incorporate comedy quite a bit into my work. I do a lot of character-driven, sort of fun writing. And, this show is serious, but it's not serious in a political way or in a moral way most of the time. I mean, I guess there's arguments about Ink Over AI, whether that's about morality, but we can go into that later. But I think that what I kind of kept coming back to was the thing I'm working on right now is my next novel coming out. And it's this sort of in the wake of everything, it felt kind of frivolous to write about this half-elf musician and his kind of flirty adventures. And I just didn't know if it was right to work on that kind of thing while this stuff is going on. And I think that that's part of the strategy of authoritarians and fascism in moments like this, is they want us to sort of not create and not tell our stories. And I think that something that we as creatives have to do is become a bit comfortable with being uncomfortable in that way. Because the truth is, I have long said that I feel fiction does a much better job of telling the story of history than actual history texts do oftentimes, because fiction contextualizes it. It gives us the way people lived and how people felt. And I just did this deep dive into my book. I've been editing that book I was talking about, and I noticed themes in it that were pretty broad about the struggles of the millennial generation and how there's themes that overlay onto the fantasy elements. And I realized that I was doing something really cool and interesting. And I wouldn't have realized that or done that had I not sort of pushed through the uncomfort to write about a frivolous, flirty, half-elf bard. And I think that I just wanted to sort of come on here because I just think that that's something that we have to talk about, because it is hard, right? Because the truth is we do the things, you can show up to protests, you can email your reps and for sure do those things. You can donate to causes and nonprofits. In fact, I'll probably include a link at the bottom of this description with a number of resources where you can go to help people in Minnesota specifically, but then also a lot of immigration, legal support across the board. So make sure you do those kinds of things. We do the things. So we do the things, but then it's sort of but then what do you do in your life? And I think that we get into this place where you start to feel guilty doing anything that's not about that thing. And you feel like you're sort of not allowed to live a normal life. And then what that turns into is a lot of like either doom scrolling and watching a bunch of like news about the thing that's happening, which doesn't actually help because you know the main story already. You sort of know what's happening already. Staying even more informed doesn't actually help the situation any. Or you just sort of like lay around and watch like sort of throwaway TV because you're like, well, at least this isn't hurting anything. At least I'm not hurting anybody in doing this. But realistically, like you're hurting yourself in doing that. You're hurting yourself by not being your full creative self. So I think that that's just something that's really important to sort of remember in times like this, that sometimes you don't even know the themes of the thing you're writing. I didn't know that the book I was writing was about the millennial experience and very like concrete metaphors for it. I didn't know that. I was just sort of like writing about my life and extrapolating my own experiences into sort of like these fantasy characters. And it turned into something kind of incredible. And so like sometimes you don't know what you're writing when you're writing it. So maybe you have an idea for a book or a show or a podcast or a movie or whatever, and you don't think it's important. You think it's kind of like a fun, silly thing, and it feels sort of dumb or useless or like a waste of time to focus on that kind of fun, silly thing. But like, do the fun, silly thing. and I think that it's just something that's like, you don't know what that will become. It'll probably become something really cool and maybe even something important if you actually like finish it and let it turn into what it's supposed to be and then put it out into the world. It might actually be able to help people quite a bit because they can see themselves reflected in the story that you created. So I just thought that was worth talking about because like I said, I think that sort of like creative paralysis, that sense that like you're not able to do something because of things going on in the world, that's what they want. That's how they win, is whatever they get us to stop living life. They get us to stop creating. They get us to stop making art. That's how they win, because they want us to not create things that counter their narrative. And frankly, a half-elf musician who's a chosen one that really wants to be a musician full time, that's the story of my life in a lot of ways. And I think that that's not unique. I think that there's so many people in this world who feel like they're told to do one thing and they're stuck in a role. They want to do this other thing. And I think that like, even though it may sound silly when you objectively like stand back and look at it, like it really is something important that can be important to a lot of people. And so I think, so follow those branches you have. Like if you have like threads to pull, like creative threads to pull, just keep pulling, because something's gonna eventually come out and you're probably gonna be pretty proud of it when it does. So yeah, I just wanted to come on here and say that because I just think that it's really important right now for us to not give up. It's so easy to do that. And also I think as fiction writers especially, it is so easy to be like, the thing I do doesn't matter, or the thing I do isn't actually important, or the thing I do isn't helping people. But guys, in my life, like fiction has kind of been one of the only things that has sort of like moved me forward and inspired me and kept me going whenever I was at my lowest. So like we're putting things into the world that really, really, really help people. And we gotta keep putting them out. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you hit like and subscribe and do all the things. And I will be back next week with a new episode of Most Writers Are Fans. Thanks so much. Bye.